Resuming debate, the honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's truly a privilege to stand here on behalf of the wonderful people of Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola. Privilege. Now, when we talk about privilege, we must remember that our work here, representing our constituents, is an honour, not an entitlement. It is something that we as parliamentarians have inherited through the centuries to ensure that we can speak and exercise our roles as grantors of supply and legislators, as something that is entrusted to us, and we must ensure that when it comes time for a new generation of parliamentarians that is in the same condition or better that we received it. Canadians sent us here with the expectation that we will carry out these duties with respect and integrity. Throughout my public service, I was a former city councillor and now as a member of parliament, I've consistently strived to maintain what I call the public trust. That is to say, when we we act, in alignment with our conduct within our public institutions as trustees of sorts. We may have legitimate disagreements about how best to pursue the public interest through reason, reflection, discussion, and debates, but the heart of any decision must be centered around protecting that collective trust of the people we serve. That people who are in positions of leadership make a point of carrying out their duties that will maintain or enhance this trust in our system by as many as possible. Fortunately, Mr. Speaker, what we've seen with the Sustainable Development Technology Canada and its Green Slush Fund falls far short of that standard. Ultimately, it comes down to what kind of country we wish to see and believe in. A country where hard work, sacrifice earns a powerful paycheck, where a citizen can afford nutritious food, gas, and a home in a safe neighborhood, where they can raise a family, perhaps build a business, or retire with dignity. That, or a country where hard work and sacrifice is viewed as something for lesser mortals, where family and high corporate or political connections are what assures success rather than a better idea or a mousetrap or a hustle. An economy of gatekeepers that is made for and managed for the gatekeeping class and those seeking to join them, where merit and hard work is undervalued in the light of who you know and what you can do with that position of authority. This latter type of description of country is corrosive, and it really harms the previous version. That's not the kind of Canada I want to see for my children. And here's where these two conflicting visions have collided. Today, we have a Canada where over 2 million hardworking, working-class people and those with lower income are lining up at food banks to feed themselves, while a rogue Crown Corporation appointed by this NDP Liberal government puts itself first in line for their own interests and not to the Canadians who are suffering the worst of our own made-in-Canada GDP per head recession, where the past 8 out of 9 quarters, Canadians have seen their purchasing power eroded. Instead, we are seeing that the NDP Liberal government that brags that it is the most activist government ever, yet it leaves those who are seeing their dollar eroded and our country's productivity erode. Those so-called progressives should be mindful of what U.S. economist Paul Krugman warned, that productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it's almost everything. That remark, after 8 back-to-back quarters of a declining GDP per head, should act as a cold shower for all members in this place. We have young people who are working multiple jobs only to find themselves locked out of the dream of home ownership, seniors who would prefer to volunteer at a food bank, not line up at them, families who will have to use metal detectors to look for disposable needles, and drug paraphernalia on their children's soccer field scratch their heads, Mr. Speaker, asking what has happened in this country. The Member of Parliament for Carleton has said that he wants to restore the promise of Canada. His mission is to bring back the country we knew and still love. He wants to put hard work and merit as a first principle for getting ahead in this country. Instead, as the member of Papineau, who was also the Prime Minister, has essentially enabled the well-connected to get ahead despite all of his talk about inclusiveness at the expense of everyone else. We've been debating this privilege motion for months. If you only listen to the Liberals, their ministers, or their parliamentary secretaries, you might think at home that there's nothing to worry about. However, many Canadians are asking why this debate continues on. Récapitulons ce que...
Let's summarize what we know. In 2021, SDTC was created with the aim of providing financial supports for green tech companies for marketing. Since the Liberal government came to power, this foundation received $1 billion in public funding. The investigations conducted revealed that the period examined by the Auditor General revealed that 82% of the transactions approved by the board did have conflicts of interest. So allow me to repeat this once again. 82% of the transactions approved by SDTC's board involved conflicts of interest. The Auditor General said that this represents millions of dollars in taxpayers' money given to companies whose board members had conflicts of interest when they voted on this funding. These figures are alarming, and many Canadians are angry when they learned how much money was at stake here. And the situation is growing worse. The Auditor General also realized that the board approved additional funds for roughly $59 million that contravened SDTC's regulations as well as the law.
The Auditor General found, and I quote, "We found that the Foundation awarded funding to 10 ineligible projects of the 58 we examined. These 10 projects were awarded $59 million, even though they did not meet key requirements set out in the contribution agreements between the government and the Foundation," end quote. Now let's stop for a moment. In my riding, I've had constituents who, through no fault of their own, were overpaid CERB. In those situations, CRA clawed back every single dollar of overpayment. Now, I've also had citizens who were, after the fact, deemed ineligible for that same CERB funding. And guess what? They also found every single dollar clawed back as well. So I ask, what will happen to these ineligible projects at CDTC? Will these people have to pay that money, have that money clawed back as well, Mr. Speaker? Or is it different when it comes to Liberal insiders pocketing tax dollars they are not eligible for? Do members of this Liberal government think that's right? One set of rules for someone who receives CERB payments they were not eligible for, and a different set of rules for ineligible insiders cashing in on SDTC funding they weren't even eligible for. How do these things happen? How is it that no one raised a red flag? Why is no one in this Liberal government saying we need to claw those funds back? Why is it, Mr. Speaker, that fairness for everyone, something that does not apply, obviously, to Liberal insiders? Now, let's be clear. The laws clearly state that a governor and council appointee chosen by the government to oversee taxpayer funds should not personally benefit from their committee role, nor should their family. And yet somehow, over 5 years, the board approved 405 transactions, with the Auditor General examining 226 and discovering that 186 of those were conflicted, an astonishing 82%, totaling $330 million. This begs the question, if the Auditor General were to analyze all 400 transactions, how many more would have showed similar conflicts? Those 400 transactions represent $832 million in taxpayer money. It it appears that appointees selected by the Prime Minister and his cabinet position themselves to profit from this privilege. Now, that's a staggering figure. Some might even call it outrageous. La vérificatrice générale.
The Auditor General designated 9 people who are responsible for these conflicts of interest, and that is why the Ministry of Industry said that this question is broader than the sponsorship scandal that involved $43 million under the Chrétien government. This is just the tip of the iceberg that we see here, and I congratulate my committee colleagues for the diligent work that they accomplished to shed light on this issue. With every layer revealed, every documents have been requested to reveal more troubling details. The government constantly refused to reveal these documents, and we understand why. The Auditor General's investigation showed that over $300 million was paid to Liberal insiders.
Minister are resisting the production order for documents to be submitted to the RCMP. The Prime Minister's office defied the House's order and instructed departments to redact sensitive information, resulting in documents heavily blacked out or not given at all. What are they hiding? Well, I think I know, we all know what they're hiding. I suspect they're hiding further misconduct and misuse of taxpayer funds. The limited information we've seen, 226 out of 400 transactions, indicates this is just the beginning, amounting to $390 million. Strangely, this doesn't seem to faze the NDP Liberal government. It's almost as if this program was deliberately designed to work this way. Liberals benefiting Liberal appointees. This is reminiscent of past scandals like SNC-Lavalin, where the Prime Minister attempted to exert pressure on then Member of Parliament for Vancouver-Granville, Jody Wilson-Raybould, to protect his wealthy associates. When she refused to comply, our great feminist Prime Minister dismissed her. Similarly, when Dr. Jane Philpott spoke out against this pathetic and shameful treatment, she was also ousted. This is the track record of our so-called feminist Prime Minister. This is the same Prime Minister who accepted a lavish vacation from the Aga Khan and has repeatedly violated ethical standards. It should come as no surprise that we find ourselves in yet another Liberal scandal involving the protection and enrichment of Liberal insiders, entitled to their entitlements. Let us also not forget that millions of taxpayer dollars were funneled to a charity that employed members of the Prime Minister's own family. Did he take responsibility? No, but his friend Mr. Morneau did. Funny how that works. It's always someone else who takes his hits. I guess that was a learning experience for the rest of us. I must express my disappointment at the backbenchers now, Mr. Speaker, on that side of the House. Sure, the infamous 24 who opposed the Prime Minister's continued premiership, note, I didn't refer to it as leadership, have been making the news. But surely there must be more than 24 that feel that their government's stonewalling of this House's production order is out of order. They must be receiving the same calls and emails from constituents that I am. They should remember that while they sit on the government side, unless they're in cabinet, and you might stretch this to a parliamentary secretary, Mr. Speaker, technically anyone who's not in cabinet is not part of the government. Those MPs, they work for the Canadians who elected them. Those seats don't belong to the Prime Minister's office or his Prime Ministerial office. They belong to the people that those MPs represent. I encourage them to reflect on why they ran for public office. I doubt any of them imagine that they would spend their time covering for entitled Liberal insiders who've profited from ill-gotten gains. Yet here we are, debating a motion of privilege because this Prime Minister prioritizes protecting his job and his friends over safeguarding taxpayer money.
Despite all the discussions about privacy protection, this has led to this. The board of SDTC used this slush fund to get rich, and the Auditor General caught them with their hand in the bag. My colleagues discovered more corruption with the help of a whistleblower. The House required the production of documents so that the RCMP can determine whether a criminal investigation is justified. The Liberal government has refused to produce these documents, which the Speaker has deemed to be in violation and breach of our question of privilege. We've been asking for almost 3 months for these documents, but rather than doing so, the work of the House has been blocked by a government that is trying to protect a Prime Minister that has clearly spent too much time.
Canadians will return to the polls to decide who will lead this great country. Will they choose a party and a leader who have shown a lack of respect for hard-earned tax dollars, a deficit of ethics, and limited moral backbone? A government that has enriched its friends while doubling housing costs, sent 2 million Canadians to food banks, and allowing crime and public disorder to rise? Or will they choose a common-sense government led by the honourable member from Carleton, one that will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budgets, and stop the crime? I believe Canadians will make the right choice, Mr. Speaker. I look forward to that day, but before I end my comments, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to recite one more time the importance of this particular debate. It is about this place we work in, the public trust that we've been asked to hold. I'm not asking for Liberals, I'm not asking for NDP or Bloc members or Green members to agree with me. We can fight out those battles. We can discuss and debate the ideas about how best to serve the public interest. But, Mr. Speaker, that public trust, that means that we have to view this place as being worthy, so that when we discuss about our work in Parliament, we can say the House, a majority decided to force the government to bring forward documents, and the government followed that order, the same as a court order would be in any other circumstance. Mr. Speaker, this is Parliament. These are the rules that we have inherited. This is the chamber that we've all sought so much and given so much to be here so we can represent our constituents. Let us ensure that when we give the torch to the next generation of parliamentarians, they can look at us in the eye and say, this is as good or better than when you found it. We cannot allow this privilege, Mr. Speaker, this privilege to be something we can fritter away. This is something that we need to press the government on, and the government members themselves, who aren't part of the cabinet, should be impressing upon their own Prime Minister and his cabinet. Just open it up. Let these things come forward. Then we can move to other discussions. But right now, Mr. Speaker, to allow this Liberal government just to pass on and say we're not complying with something that they've been ordered, that's wrong. We have a duty to this place to make sure that those orders mean something, and to force this government to start honoring the traditions of this great country and the Westminster system that has served it so well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.